Okay, so our next speaker jumped with us during the late 1970s before he decamped to Auckland. In those pre-tandem days, he trained literally thousands of students before they made their first static line jump. Later on he moved to Queensland and he's still living there today. Now he is at least as charming as our previous speaker, so much so that in his words he shanghaied one of those first jump students from the ranks of respectability and she became his wife. That's no mean feat when the object of your affections is far more worried about their own mortality than some dude who's breathing all over them and lingering over their harness adjustments. He was part of my generation of skydivers and we always thought of this guy as a slightly older, wiser and more respectable member of the gang. He was kind of like our Kaumatua. Well, I'm sure he wouldn't describe himself as that. He certainly had much newer and gruntier cars than any of us. Well, anyway, appearances can be deceptive, and of course he realised he was one of us. In fact, he was kind of worse, really. He was a keen skydiver, but he did defy the laws of physics in free fall. As Dave Wilkins once famously wrote, if you've never been to terminal velocity, Trevor Benton will take you there. Thank God for balloon suits. If our last speaker probably sold you a parachute, Trevor probably fixed your TV. Big welcome, please, Trevor Benton.
Thanks, Phil, for that great introduction. And a gathering like this reminds me of that movie, The Big Chill, in a lot of ways. Good to see everybody here. There's a lot less hair around than I remembered, but on the other hand, it's far better to be bald than have no hair at all. I was introduced to skydiving, or alerted to skydiving by Ian Drinkwater in the late 72. He had just come back from a world meet competition meeting in Oklahoma, and I ended up going to the Karori Hall, where I was trained by Bill Ashworth, and several weeks later, because of bad weather, I was finally dispatched on my first jump at OTAG. And in retrospect, I'm glad that main parachute opened, because if it hadn't, I don't know if I would have done very much about it. My skydiving career was pretty unspectacular, but I did survive. I had no near misses, or I don't think I caused anyone else to have a near miss either. But I did evolve, or my career did evolve into the commercial aspect of parachuting. Firstly with Ian Drinkwater, the Wellington Parachute School, which was formed in about mid-1978. A year later I moved to Auckland with the equipment and carried on commercial training in a reasonably big way in Auckland with Ian's brother Ross. That was in 1979, and I moved to Queensland, Australia 10 years later, and carried on student instruction there too at the Gatton drop zone. Run by John Friswell, some people might know, but remember, I think Bill does. But I was never really that keen on the Australian parachuting scene. The training and safety was on a par with this country, or certainly as good as New Zealand, but I never really got into certainly into the social side of it. And after all, that's what I think parachuting is mostly about. Probably 50% humour and 50% the social aspect of it. But I was with the club. I held a few positions. I remember a lot of debate over the purchase of the club van by the committee of the day, which proved to be a very good idea. As I said, my personal parachuting career was nothing spectacular whatsoever, certainly nothing on the competitive side of it. But I was there partly for the, certainly partly for the social side of it, and there was a lot of humour around, and I can remember a few things. The funniest comment that I ever read in a logbook was, "Bad spot, but good ride to hospital in the ambulance." From Stan Ninkrantz, he thought he was going to, well, he did suggest to us that he might apply to the Federation to get a waiver for the water jump, which I think was a Class C, a C licence requirement. And he thought he might get a waiver on account of all the time that he'd spent at sea. I remember once, first jump students in the 70s, we had someone on the target with target control with an arrow facing in the direction that we wanted the student to face. And one day a first jump student followed Addo, which was Bill's dog, that happened to be running around the target. And eventually did make it back. A great comment, I don't want this to sound in bad taste, but a great comment from Peter Golding, and if everyone remembers his particular delivery, but he once said that if you want to know about broken bones, just ask Stan Jones. Another comment made by Bill Ashworth in the 70s, he told us that one day a complete set of parachute equipment will cost $1,000. There wasn't so much inflation at that time. Probably the most memorable flying incident that I can remember was Dave Ashworth's famous beat-up at Levin. I know quite a few of you there. Alan Romain went to the cover. The situation was, we're at Levin. Dave Ashworth flew the plane down from, which was a Cessna 185, down from Palmerston North with a load of jumpers. And in any event, it was unsuitable for jumping. So he departed. We all decided to flag it. Well, he did this unbelievable beat-up, and I can still see that wingtip that far from the top wire of the fence. And in fact, he took the aerial off Joe Kincaid's car, cut it clean off. Perfect. And to make sure that it wasn't a fluke, he came around and did the exact same beat-up a second time. And it was at that point that Alan Romain, I remember, dived for cover under a vehicle. Anyway, that was the most spectacular jump that, the most spectacular feat of flying that I've ever seen.
Trevor, he was heard to say that's the lowest beat up I'll ever do and live.
I remember you were in that plane.
I was.
Yes, I can remember. In fact, I saw you at about head level as you went past. In fact, the plane was full of people. Anyway, enjoy yourselves. Take good care of yourselves. Eat properly. Do some exercise. Have the odd night out. And in addition, treat every day as though it's going to be your last, because one day you're bound to be right. Have a good evening.
Now, one of the things that we talk about from time to time tonight, and we already have, is absent friends. And I'd just like to take a moment now for us to remember some people that have passed on now, and good friends. And I apologise in advance if there's anybody that we've left off this list, but I'd just like to take a moment for us to remember some good friends. And I'll just read the names now, and then we'll just have a wee silence for that. So they are Dave Ashworth, Vaughan Brady, Diana Brandon, Stu Boyd, John Butterworth, Helen Corkill, Marilyn Ettimer, Dave Hall, Bruce Hamlin, Chrissy Jamison, Stan Jones, Joe Kincaid, Tony Lee, Paul Lewis, Stan Linkrantz, Stephanie Ongley, Darcy Perry, Shirley Upton, and Bill Vaney. I'd just like you to observe a moment's silence for our friends, please. Right, which now leads me on to our third era speaker. Now, our final speaker has a bit of an advantage over the previous two in that we didn't know each other until very recently, so I can't really share any memories that he'd rather stay buried. He joined Wellington Skydivers in 1994. He had the luxury of doing most of his 535 jumps at Hood Aerodrome, a DZ with a mercifully long runway, no hills and gullies, access to actual toilets, and freedom from cow shit. Lad, you don't know you were born. Brett Parker's our man. He also did some jumping in Australia and Germany, and he finally hung up his rig in 2010. Now he currently works for the Ministry of Education as a, now I'll get this right, Senior Analyst responsible for international education. Now I think it would be fair to say that not many skydivers, apart from Nick Campion possibly, have job titles like that. But once again it shows what an incredibly diverse and interesting bunch of people we are. Now Brett's also been a good advocate for the sport, and he's used his powers of persuasion to get his wife, his sister, his mother and his cousin to do tandem jumps. Now Brett, I assume we're talking about different people here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brett, who will bring our oral history up to date. And will answer those nagging questions for us oldies about whatever happened to WSI after we drifted out of the sea. Brett, thank you.
Days, there floated the Aero Club bar at night, often led by Matt Murray and occasionally Matt McCarthy. I distinctly remember a series of nude dirt dives in the pool one particular Saturday, which became a tradition for a little while, I think, though I only saw one of them. In late 1994, Mac invested in building a new operation at the north end of Hood and put a power of work into a rigging loft, training area and bunk rooms. Mikey Wilcox was a new tandem master. Pete Powerpole came down from the bay to be the camera flyer. And after Keith Kelleher qualified in AFF, the static line courses started to be phased out. Jane Barker ran the business side of Mac's operation, though Mac may dispute that. The club had already invested in new student rigs and we had plenty of punters. At that stage I was scraping money for jumps by repaying student rigs. An indicator of just how busy we were is that I could often afford to jump just my packing fees. I recall one scorching day we were lucky enough to offer chopper jumps out of an old Sikorsky S55, which is mainly used for top dressing. So after removing the spray gear, the cabin had enough room for about 10 jumpers, so long as you were careful not to sit down or touch the walls of your rig or any bare flesh. At the time, WSI made a number of excursions to other DZs, especially Bob Howard's sizable operation at Rotorua. In March 1996, there was a Catalina boogie there, and in March 1997, they put on a caravan memorial boogie for Andy Truscott. A particular memory for me, as it was the first time I jumped from a turbine aircraft. In October 1997, went en masse to Bridge Par for their first ever no-man boogie. This is the first time I'd seen Marty Lloyd's drop zone, and a twin turbine bird to boot. It was a massively memorable and successful boogie. Jumpers came from all over for it. Quite a few 100 sort of dunkings were done for that particular one. In 1996, back in Wellington, we all floated to Paraparaumu for Ian Drinkwater's 50th. The first time I actually jumped there. Great location, though even I could see with my limited experience, it demanded very careful canopy control of the built-up area around. At that stage, I believe Simon Ewing Jarvie was running a competing tandem business in Paraparaumu, but no real involvement of the local sport jumpers. For whatever reason, Mac shifted his operation to Paraparaumu, taking DAS 206 over the hill and setting up shop in the local hangar. The sporties flocked there, including our new A licensees, but due to landing issues and lack of outs, we couldn't really train new jumpers. Another issue was that we're now under Wellington ATC control. A number of times, jumps were seriously delayed at altitude, waiting for airliners to fly through. After a year, I think, Mac shifted back to Masterton, and then moved his rigging loft and DAS north to Taupo. And about that time, Wendy and Greg Smith were leading a skydive renaissance at Taupo, and they were the first DZ to invest in a converted Cresco as their main jump ship. In 1988, Marty and Mai organised a bunch of Wellington Hawke's Bay sporties to go over Equinox booking to Gulawa, which was an absolutely fantastic experience. It's the first time I jumped in Australia. I got to jump with Jerry Bird out of a Skyvan. And he got my star crest and the t-shirt, of course. Anyway, from 1999, Marty met local demand by flying down the weekends from Bridgepar to Martinborough. Initially from a field next to the river, no facilities at all. No problem for guys, of course, but I'm told the ladies demand a certain level of civilisation. Marty and I were busy qualifying F students and taking tandems, and Bill Ashworth got back into regular jumping. Best of all, Bill had a state-of-the-art camera rig and really enjoyed filming sports loads. We used to crowd around the back of the van to laugh at our jumps as a display monitor, and speaking for myself, it's like I actually learned something. By 2001, the lack of facilities issue was becoming a bit pressing at Martinborough, and Marty moved into the head aerodrome office, which he still operates today. This is where my story connects with politics, so pardon me while I recharge. At the time, a cunning plan was proposed whereby WSI would combine with Marty's operation using the club gear to bring in more new jumpers operated out of the old hood hangar. We had enthusiasm. Jez Santos was our webmaster, Roger Ham was club president, Janet McEwen was secretary/dictator, and Bill DeVore was sort of the avuncular patriarch. BJ McCann, our tandem master, and Dave Gamble and Bill took on AFF. We even had t-shirts printed. Unfortunately, the combined operation was not to be, and I shall leave it there. WSI did invest in leasing an old 182 from no less than Jim Liver at Mercer. Could possibly be viewed as a deal with the devil, but needs must. So after enjoying several jumps from their Platus Porter, we took FGZ down to Hood. Thanks. There were definite complications having two factions of skydiving operations at one DZ, about which the less said the better. At least while I'm still sort of sober. Despite our enthusiasm, the fact was the spare time organisation of a club DZ just could not work anymore. The usual hassles of getting plane, pilot, punters and passable weather all together at the same time. After a number of months, we had to look at the club in the bum. FZ went back to Mercer, and that was basically it for the student rigs too. We used to go up to Danny Burke after that to jump off Cape Wells and Andy Pine in their converted shearing shed held in the airstrip there. Quite a few troopers from Linton came to get the A licences. I think that's part of their business was the military market. And two of our jumpers, consider remember the Major, who one day had a main reserve entanglement, bounced a bit, walked away, finished his army course, then went to hospital to get his broken back seen to. I stopped regular skydiving in late 2005, after 30 years good vibes in Motueka, and before my twin boys were born. Then from late 2006, I took the family over the hill for an occasional jump, until I sold all my gear in late 2010. Well, except the helmet and the t-shirts, of course. Suffice to say, 16 years of huge fun with great friends, wouldn't have missed it for anything. Blue skies. Cheers.